Hey guys, welcome to another webinar with BenQ. My name is Raph Nogal. I'm a portrait and wedding photographer based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I have Yadu Fereaud, a portrait and fashion photographer, as well based out of Toronto. And we're really excited about today's webinar because we're going to talk to you guys about speedlights and off-camera flash and the differences between them, how we use them together, what are some of the benefits, some of the obstacles that we encounter using those systems. So it'll be a really fun one because we're doing a live shoot outside today. So yeah, without further ado, we'll introduce our model, Julia. She'll be helping us out today.
Ta-da!
Excellent,
Awesome,
so
yeah.
let's get started. All right, so talking about speedlights, here we have ProPhoto A10. As we always say, it doesn't necessarily matter the type of speedlight that you use. There are a couple of things though that when I started and I was looking at speedlights, they kind of mattered. Things like battery life or cycle time and things like that. And we'll go into that with some more detail. But for me, I would always use a speedlight as an off-camera flash. So it didn't matter if it was a strobe or whatever kind of lighting. Even when we talked the last time about constant lights,
Yep.
it was always a separate light away from the camera with a modifier. Now I know you as a wedding photographer, it's normal to have on-camera flash and have it physically on the camera, and you're using it in your weddings, events, getting into the crowds and things like that. So it's used a different way that I never used it for. Now, truth be told, when I started, yes, I was using it on camera, but I was using it on camera to bounce. So I would actually have, for example, a reflector. The
Right.
camera, the speedlight was faced towards that reflector, and that became my modifier that then I would shoot to the model. So I was always never wanting that direct flash. For
Yeah.
me, it
It's
always,
a certain look.
yeah, it was always kind of like paparazzi style.
Yep.
And what's interesting is that there's some times where I'm shooting a model and the model will say, hey, can I get a paparazzi look? And I'm like, you mean direct flash? So it's weird because I would take my studio strobe or whatever and then literally put it as if it was on top of my camera, or bring the camera underneath the modifier to then get that look, and then maybe, you know, take the modifier off and do bare bulb. But that was kind of the discussion of on camera versus off camera in terms of the flash. For you, do you prefer, even you when you're using a speedlight, do you prefer it to be off camera or on camera?
Well, I think it depends on the situation. As a wedding photographer, I'm doing things indoors and I'm able to bounce the light and I'm able to access it quickly. And so there are times where that's, you know, we're really just trying to run and gun at certain points of that event. So it does come in handy having it on camera. But of course, these lights have come a long way. I remember, you know, the only other option for off-camera lighting other than speedlights was really to get anything that was battery powered, that had, you know, motorcycle battery and cables and all that kind of stuff. So even those small speedlights became our off-camera option because they were so portable and you know, and easily accessible. So they've definitely come a long way in terms of modifiers and things like that, which we will cover. But yeah, I think there's uses for both, I think, depending on the situation. And sometimes that paparazzi look is all you really need and all you really, you know, that's what you're going for, and that's the tool to get the job done.
One of the things that we won't be able to kind of showcase here because we are outside is what you mentioned right now about bouncing light. One of the tips that I was always told is be cautious of the wall that you're bouncing off of, basically of the color of that wall. If it's a red wall and you're bouncing, you are bouncing red towards your subject. So a lot of times when I was shooting with, you know, on-camera flash, and I was bouncing up, I was kind of always looking to see, are the ceilings white?
Yeah.
Is it cream? How is that going to reflect down? And sometimes, depending on the house or the location, if it was green, I was always like, oh no, like I already knew that that was gonna reflect that color, and then I would get these kind of greenish looking shots.
Yeah.
Pretty much the same thing here. Here we have grass, and if we were shooting natural light with the sun, well, the sun is hitting the grass, and the green of the grass reflects onto the subject, and then you get that green cast of that color on the model's face, which again, we don't want, which is the reason why I like using the off-camera flash even when I'm on location. So anyway, anything else to say about any tips that we might not be covering because we're outside? right
No, I
now?
think,
'Cause we're
the
not gonna
balancing
do.
thing is, I always like to balance wherever the subject is looking. So if we're looking at the barrel of the lens and my subject their nose is off the center on that side, I'll be bouncing on this side. If my subject is on this side of the lens, I'll be bouncing off that wall. I don't typically like bouncing up because what goes up must come down. And typically I would never be putting a softbox all the way up here. I would be putting it a little bit lower to get some more light in the eyes, so we're not getting those raccoon eyes as we call them. So getting light in either direction is always great, because if you go to that direction, it comes back from that direction, and now it's more pleasing in general.
One of the things, and I guess this talks about Speedlights in terms of battery life, is that when I was shooting Nikon, for example, I had a lot of SB700s and SB900s.
Yep.
And I would almost collect them. So I had like 5 of one, 2 of the other. But because they used AA batteries, this was one of the reasons why I started going away from Speedlights and more to the studio strobes. And during that time, yes, Profoto had, for example, the B1, which was expensive, but at least it had that battery pack that you can just swap out and have another lithium battery, as opposed to weddings that I was shooting where it was a package of that Costco 48 pack of AA's where you're just constantly going through batteries. And then when they said, well, why don't you, instead of throwing away all these batteries, why don't you use the rechargeable batteries, the nickel metal hydrate batteries? But I found that they didn't hold the charge as well, or it didn't last as long as the alkaline disposable batteries. So then, yes, you were using something that you could recharge, but it wouldn't last as long, so you were changing them out even more so than the alkaline. So when I started looking at Speedlights, where all the companies were using, and still some of them still do, one of the reasons why Profoto, the A1X, the A1, the A10 became so popular is because they used the lithium batteries. That was a big thing for me, that if I needed something really portable, really small, that can kind of fit into a grab and go bag, then the fact that this had the lithium battery, for me, was a big change.
And on that note, one thing that I love about this specifically is that once we take these modifiers off, when you look at the actual battery, it's extremely easily taken off and on. So I was in positions at weddings where, I'd have an extra one in my shirt pocket or in my pant pocket, or, and if I happen to run out during a moment where, let's say, there's an entrance or something's about to happen, I can swap this in and out within seconds and be back online in terms of my flash being available to me. I remember, struggling through AA's and putting them in the wrong way, and one of them spilling on the floor, and I'm trying to collect it, I'm trying not to panic as things are happening, and obviously with weddings and events, it's real time stuff. We don't get to redo anything. So this definitely helped in terms of getting us back up and running if batteries were an issue.
Now you're going to notice right away, the way I have the Speedlight set up is with this modifier. This is the way that I would shoot if I was shooting a Speedlight or a studio strobe. It's always the light with a modifier, and I have the trigger on the camera. We didn't kind of mention this before, but I'm shooting with an A7 Mark IV, and the lens that I'm using today is my favorite lens, which is the 135 1.8 G Master. This is my most favorite focal length, especially if I'm shooting outdoors, just because, again, distance doesn't really matter. If I wanted full body, I can back up as much as I want to get full body. I just love the look and how sharp this lens is. Again, it's my personal favorite. So with this, if I was in a studio, and I've mentioned this before, there's space to deal with. So I probably couldn't use the 135 unless my back was all the way up against the wall, and I would still be getting maybe a 3/4 length shot. But having said that, the light, whichever light that I'm using, is still going to be that distance to the subject, and then I can move around wherever I want depending on the lens that I have. So that's the reason why, for me, I wouldn't have this Speedlight on my camera with this lens, because again, the distance that I'd be shooting and the power of that flash to cover and actually make it, and again, it's not the look that I'm, the end result that I'm kind of looking for. And so that's why you see both of these modifiers are basically 2 feet each. So it's kind of the same spread of light, if you want to call it that. And so that's why, regardless of whether it's a studio strobe or a Speedlight. I know you wanted to mention about the stand as well, because it's got this really light stand. So for something like a Speedlight, yes, you can have your gear that is portable just like the Speedlight is portable.
Yeah, when you look at sort of the general differences between, what is a Speedlight and what is a, a monolight, obviously size is one thing. You could tell right away they're shaped differently, they weigh differently, different amounts. And so we're able to kind of get away with, different modifiers, again, that we'll talk about. But also, yeah, the gear, like the light stand could be lighter because the light itself is lighter, and the modifier itself has to be lighter. You can't put a, 8-foot, 5-foot octa on here. It's just not it's not the right equipment for it, where you can do that with, something a little bit bulkier, right? So.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the test shot first. Julia, are you ready?
Yeah.
Of course, always ready. Okay, so again, I'll let her know this is going to be her main light. Now this is kind of different when we're outside. Right now we are in a shaded area, but there is still sunlight hitting kind of harshly over there. So when I'm outside, obviously ambient light might be the main light, and I might be using this light as a kicker or hair light, or maybe a side light, or maybe just a fill. In this case, I do want to tell her that this light is the main light for her, which means that I'm going to try to darken the ambient light. I'm going to bring up the aperture. So I know that you mentioned that you would probably be shooting in high-speed sync. I myself am going to close down just to create a difference. I'm going to stay at sync speed, so I'm going to be at 1/200th of a second shutter speed, and I'm going to then close down the aperture to an f10 and then shoot ambient light as a secondary, and then the main light will be the Speedlight and then also the studio strobe. So we'll start off just to show what an f10 will look like as a test. So taking that shot, I already can see at the back of the camera that it's going to come out dark, because that's how it reads here. And then I turn on the flash. Now this is one of the things, again, that we kind of talk about as well, but for the light to the distance, I've got it about 2 to 3 feet away from her. And this is kind of, again, just to test out what it will look like with that flash. So let me take the first image. We fired it. We look, okay. And so yeah, light is there. I myself would want it to be a little more powerful. I have two choices now. Because we're in the shaded area, I can open up my aperture to allow more light to come in, or I can increase the power of the flash. For something like this, because this is a 76 watt second flash compared to the studio strobe, which is 250 watt seconds, power is going to be one of those things that is going to be a difference between them. So there is going to be obviously a time where I've maxed out the power of a Speedlight, and then I have to make other changes to my exposure to compensate for the fact that this just isn't strong enough. Now back in the day, I would even have 2 Speedlights.
Oh yes.
And it would be, instead of having one shooting at full power where this recycle time would take so long, I would have 2 of them at half power so that the recycle time would be quicker. But then I've kind of spent the money on 2 Speedlights.
Well, I remember even a 3 brackets. There was for 3, and you would mount them where it would be in a little like the Mercedes sign, right? One on top and one on either side, and you try to fill a big modifier like an umbrella with it.
So as a difference right now, I just changed my aperture from f10, I went to f6.3. Shutter speed remains the same, ISO remains the same, and that same distance, and now I have a proper exposure on the back of the camera. So just by making that adjustment, again, if my Speedlight is out of reach, it's too high or whatever, and I'm not going to make the change, now with ProPhoto, I can just go to my cell phone, make the change on my cell phone if I needed to do an increase of power or down. But because that is already at 8, to go up to, this goes up to 10.
It does, yeah.
So up to 10, we're already at full power, which means we would have to wait what, I like the recycle time of the ProPhoto, but it's still a second and a half.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get a little bit lesser recycling time here because the capacitors hold, a little bit less. The battery is a bit smaller as well. So that recycling isn't going to be as fast as you would have during using a mono light. And so Jadu, for example, in a situation like this, and I know you're comparing the two, what would you choose if you had a shoot out today? After we're done here, let's say you have a photo shoot in this exact spot, what would you pick between the two? How do you make that decision?
So this kind of goes back to depending on the time of the era that I would be shooting in. Back in the day, the choice would have been the Speedlight,
Of course.
because it was the most portable. It would fit in my camera bag. I didn't have this type of modifier. In fact, at that time, the Speedlights, because they were rectangular, I would buy, for example, the Westcott Black Rapid.
Yes.
Is it called the Black Rapid?
Oh, I don't know.
Or Rapid Box?
Rapid box.
Basically, and it's the 2-foot modifier for Speedlights. So I would have that as the modifier.
Right.
That would have been my choice 100%. And at that time, even the B1 was still fairly large. It's
Yes.
still a big
And
monolight.
it's much bigger than a B10 as well.
So once the B10 came out, I then kind of looked at both of them and said, well, to me, a Profoto B10 is a portable light system. It is more powerful. It does have faster recycle time. So my preference now is the B10, because even the stand, I probably wouldn't put the B10 with a big modifier on this stand,
Yep.
but this stand for me goes everywhere with me. So that setup, if I was going on location, and I've done weddings where I've brought that, and I've done indoors with the B10 with no problem. I love the fact that, again, the battery life is great, recycles really quickly, and the power. So I'm really happy with the Profoto B10. For me, the Profoto B10 is a portable light.
Right.
And because I don't physically put the light on the camera, for me, that's the best choice. If I was gonna put it on the camera to balance and things like that, obviously I couldn't do that with a B10. It would go to the Profoto. But yeah, that would be my choice. Yeah, let's switch it up. Let's see here. All right. The other thing that we kind of talked about before we started rolling was that both of these two modifiers have 2 layers of diffusion, but we did have to increase the power of the Speedlight to be a little more powerful. Again, it's a scale of 1 to 10 for Profoto, but the Speedlight is at an 8, whereas the B10 is at a 7.
Which is a quarter power, so 8,
Exactly.
just in case, just so for you guys who don't own Profoto, again, this is not a Profoto specific, we're just using those examples because that's the equipment we use. But 10 is full power, 9 becomes half power, 8 becomes quarter power, and so on. As you know, we're used to fractions when we're looking at Speedlights and other systems. But just so you know, when we're talking about, when we say 8, we do mean a quarter power in that case.
So yeah, I really like these.
So how's that comparing to the Speedlight? Is it pretty similar?
So as I kind of go back and forth, one thing that I do notice, just again, I'm looking through the viewfinder, is the color. So on the Speedlight, I'm getting, I guess, more yellow.
Mm-hmm.
And with the Profoto B10, it's coming in more magenta.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting a little more red. And then again, that's preference, but I like the colors that I'm getting out of the Profoto B10.
But we also don't know if that's coming from the light or from the actual modifier, because now
True.
we are using 2 different modifiers, so we're not comparing apples to apples exactly.
Yeah.
So it could be either of those things, I guess. Right?
But that's really the only thing that I can visually see through the viewfinder. Now on these cameras, the viewfinder is higher resolution than looking at the back of the LCD.
Right.
So if I am checking focus or anything like that, I'm usually going through the viewfinder just to be a little more accurate for that reason. But both of them are giving me the same light in terms of the intensity. Obviously that one was set to a little bit higher power, quote unquote. But this one again is giving me the same look. Basically it's the same modifier, the same surface area, the same light position. So I could end up getting the same or similar results shooting with the Speedlight. For me, again, the preference is still the B10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
How do you want to showcase, because I know that you wanted to do a different type of...
Yeah, so I'll talk about a couple of different things here. One of them being, durability. We buy equipment, we make investments in these lights, and we obviously want them to last. And one way really to test durability is over time. So, without making drop tests or anything like that, we don't want to do that. But I mean, at the end of the day, you know, durability comes in the form of just usage. And so, you know, this light here, for example, has a lot more moving parts, right? So, you know, as these wear out over the years, there is, you know, more likeliness of something happening, or you bumping something and something possibly, you know, going wrong. Versus here, where it's really just one single piece with a bracket. So, you know, it's hard to talk about durability, really. It's just, again, has to do with time and your overall usage. Some people are quite rough with their gear. Some people are, you know, a little bit, they baby everything as well. So it really depends where you're at. In terms of portability, that's another thing too. Someone might consider, you know, a Speedlight versus a monolight based on portability. And I think that was a bigger factor, you know, 10 years ago, before the B10 or the B1X or the B1 has come out. We had the B2 initially, where we had, you know, from Profoto, we had a head, but also cables and a battery. I remember using alien bees and my assistant having to carry a motorcycle battery, literally, and a converter.
That was the same
cables.
with Elinchrom.
That's right.
Elinchrom had the Ranger packs, which
Yes.
were those, you know, acid-filled batteries that you had to drag.
Yeah, so durability was quite portability was quite noticeable back then. Right now, you know, this versus this, I mean, yeah, there's a size difference. Obviously, there's a size difference in terms of the dimension of the actual head, where the light comes out. So, you know, I consider both of these to be quite portable. This fits in my camera bag along with all my lenses and my cameras, so just as much as this does. So I think it's subjective, I think, at this point. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about also power, and then I'll talk about kind of usage. And power, we talked about 76 watt seconds with this, and 250, or if you get the B10X Plus, or, you know, and again, another brand that's slightly bit bigger, perhaps, you're going to get maybe 500 watt seconds, so another stop of light. And I think, again, depending on what you're doing, depending on the circumstances, you know, it's kind of, you just have to pick the tools for the job, right? If you're outside and it's, you know, and the sun is right there and not over there, you are going to be battling a lot of, you know, natural light, a lot of sun, and perhaps, you know, something bigger will do the job versus something smaller, which, you know, you're going to basically limit yourself based on, you know, the power that you brought with you. So, you know, I mean, how else would you talk about, you know, power? Like, when does that really come into become a factor for you?
I know that a lot of people talk about it in terms of distance, like how far can the light be from the model where the same amount of power can get there, where a light that's bigger, even the B10 Plus at 500 watts, a lot of people will always look at it like, well, just give me the one that has the most power, because then they just feel that they can bring the light further away and still get that the power that will actually reach the subject. I really don't shoot that way. I never shoot with the modifier light really, really far away, where I would then rely on it being at full power. In fact, right now, shooting where I have to, you know, close down the aperture to an f7 or an f10, that for me is also strange, because I would rather balance ambient light. Like right now, in the photos that I took, the background is really dark, and she really pops out because she's being lit and the background's not being lit. But if I were to change that and bring my aperture, you know, open up my aperture a little bit more, where you can see more of the greenery around her, and I just use this as a splash of light on her, I would probably bring the power down.
Yeah.
So for me, I like the modifier to be closer to the subject, or as close that it'll be out of frame. So power doesn't really, I'm never at the max power. I'm never shooting at you know, 10.
Where I think power also matters, really in terms of lights that we choose, is what modifier we're filling, right? If we are going to fill a 5-foot octabox with, you know, a diffusion panel or two inside, and, you know, perhaps put a grid on top of that, which is going to eat a little bit of light, that power is going to come in handy, because, you know, even though you may not want to shoot at full power, you may have to, just to fill that big modifier. And so that's one of the cases where I think that's really matters more to me, if I'm filling modifiers or putting grids on things, versus, again, the distance thing. Because at the end of the day, you know, we talk about softness of light or soft shadows. You know, if you put a 5-foot octa, you know, 20 meters away, it's not going to be as soft as if you had it 2 feet away from your subject. So that matters as well, right? But anyways, let's. What I want to do is show you guys what photos look like on camera, and then kind of compare that to an off-camera option. And again, the versatility of an on and off-camera flash, like the A10, for example, or another type of Speedlight from different brands, is the fact that you can have it on and off camera. So again, if you're doing a lot of birthday parties or events, corporate events, things like that, and of course even weddings, this is a very versatile tool where you're able to really use it in both ways. Now, the limiting factor on camera, as you can see, as I face that towards the subject, is its location. There's no way for me to move this over here. Yes, I can hold it with my hand, but now it becomes off camera. So when we talk about it on camera, there's really just one way for that light to go out, and it's straight ahead. I'm also limited by the amount of modifiers that I can use. So if I wanted to use something like this on here, if I do that, I can't see what I'm shooting, right? So there's a limit to what this can actually. And the magnet's quite strong here. Could you mind pulling that out? Mm-hmm. Thanks. So those are some of the limitations, right? But again, it's subjective, right? What are we photographing, and what do we need to accomplish? So let's take a quick shot with this and just see what things look like. So I'm just going to kind of pick a little pocket here. I'm just going to go first with the ambient light here. So I'm using the Alpha 1 and the 100 STF f2.8 lens, one of my favorite portrait lenses. I use this for headshots a lot. And we're just going to get a good sense of the light here. So I'm at ISO 100, and I am at f5.6, which it gives me the bokeh of a 2.8, which is great. That's what I love about this lens. And I'm at 1/60th of a second. So I'm just going to take a quick shot here. That's it, perfect. And again, it's quite underexposed. She is wearing a white shirt, so the shirt is quite prominent. And again, the leaves and everything in the background are quite dark. And on camera, let's see what this does. I'm going to go to TTL because I like to at least have a place to start. And I'm going to just have this do what it needs to do to give me a proper exposure. So let's have a quick look here. Nice. Good. So it's got, it's giving me more light. It's throwing light at me. I'm maybe 10 feet from the subject, and it's okay. It's not bad. It's filling in those shadows. There's not a lot of light going behind her, again, because I'm so far away. I'm 10 feet to her, and so the light is not really reaching the background, but it is filling the eyes and everything else. But it's also doing it in a very flat way, right? The light is coming directly at the subject without the opportunity of giving us any pleasant shadows or depth or dimension in the face.
And for you, when you have it on camera, do you kind of instinctively know what distance you can be? Like if you were at 20 feet, you would say, oh, this on-camera flash is not even gonna reach. Or is there, if you have it at full power, do you kind of know this is the limit of where I can stand? Comparative to the...
Not necessarily. It really depends on my camera settings, right? If I am, right now I'm at 5.6. If I'm at f11 and I'm 20 feet back and I'm at ISO 100, yeah, there's going to be obviously limitations of how far that can reach. So it all depends really where you are. If you're indoors, a lot of times we do cocktail hours this is where we use on-camera flash. People just having cocktails and just chatting and having hors d'oeuvres at weddings. And so we'll use this just for those quick snapshots of people hugging and looking into the camera. To me, this is not the most creative way of using light. To me, it's kind of amateurish in a sense. It's got that look, that amateurish look to it, I suppose, if you want to call it that. But it is a certain type of look as well. There's obviously nothing wrong with it, but I like a little bit more control, a little bit more dimension in my images. So this is a great way to at least get something visually in front of you, where if it's a dark room, at least you'll get something. But if I had my way, I'd be going off camera for sure. Mm-hmm. So let's do that. Let's put on a trigger. I'll give this to you maybe. Mm-hmm. And I'll put on a trigger here and get a light in just to show you the differences here. And if you've done any kind of off-camera light before, you're going to see, you know that there's going to be a difference here with bringing in a bigger modifier like this and how that's going to compare to off-camera flash, or to on-camera flash rather, right? If you just give me that for a sec, obviously the difference right away, the size of this versus the size of that. I mean, there's no, that light has gone from here to a size of that. So obviously we're going to get a different effect. And we're going to get this nice and close to her too, maybe about 3 feet away versus 10, and that's going to be a noticeable difference. So I'm at 7A, just want to make sure I'm on the same channel here. And we're not even going to use that flash at all. I just want to kind of use this guy to show the differences here. So we're going to go to TTL. Yeah, and that first shot already is a huge difference. How we're seeing a lot of shadows on the other side of the face, opposite of the flash, and we're only at we're at 5.7, so we've got a lot of power to play with here, and we're still filling quite a big modifier. I haven't changed my camera settings. I kept the the 1/60th of a second, 5.6 ISO 100 consistent. And again, we can move this back, have a bit more harder shadows, or we can move it even closer. And yeah, the look is just a different look, right? And that's I think subjectively that's when we can make those decisions on what.
With the modifier, the click behind you, this is another thing that I've seen, of course, also in weddings, is when you're the main photographer, but that you actually have an assistant that's holding the light.
Yeah.
Not to say that the B10 is much heavier than a Speedlight, because I don't think so, but for someone who might be following you around, if you're shooting tables or shooting in the reception, and you have a human light stand, that person might be literally just coming around, and it might
100%.
be easier to kind of maneuver this than it would be a heavier studio strobe.
Oh, 100%. Even just the fact that it's not on a light stand is already night and day difference, because we don't have to worry about the legs kicking out and getting in between tables and things like that. So this is already, this is a nice way to combine the features of what we love about these monolights and the ability to use bigger modifiers and have that in that portable kind of way. So that's a really great point, because I do use that quite a bit. And again, if you're shooting weddings, assistants are almost mandatory, I would say, because then you have the ability to do this type of thing, right?
Do you also notice that, for example, if you're at a wedding and you have someone that's assisting you, are they already familiar and constantly monitoring battery life and things like that? Things like recycle time, does it matter to you that the recycle time is fast or slow, depending on if you're shooting something that's important, like an important moment in the wedding, and you're like, okay, I need the flash to actually do its thing?
Definitely. So my style of shooting when I'm doing creative stuff is not very fast. I do pose and talking, and then I take 1 or 2 shots. So typically I don't need that fast recycling time. But when it's a dance, let's say they have something planned, they've done a dance together, and they're going to do a dip at the end, and they really wanted that photo because they worked super hard to get it done. I want to make sure that I have a couple of bursts of flash available to me. So that's when that would come in handy. Right? And again, that's something that you have to just know when that becomes an issue for you, or when you need it and when you don't.
Yeah, for me, again, depending on the shoot, if it's a fashion shoot, I just instinctively like the fact that I don't have to worry about recycle time as being an issue. That's one of the reasons why I normally don't bring the flash up to full power, because I do want that if she's moving and she gets into that perfect pose and I'm looking through the viewfinder, I want that flash to go. And so I don't want to have to say, hold it, just wait, because I'm waiting to hear that little beep on the flash telling me, okay, I'm ready to fire again. So, and I remember back in the day, that's what would annoy me, is that I would try to keep up with the recycle time of the flash. Right. So if this was too slow and the B10 was quicker, I would rather that. We actually did a test at this park maybe a year ago where we were comparing 2 Speedlights, and the ProPhoto won, but ProPhoto was actually a faster recycle time compared to that other brand. Now, the other brand was an actual camera brand flash, so it wasn't like buying a third party or some cheap brand. It was actually a comparable in terms of price point and everything, but the recycle time suffered it wasn't as fast. It didn't recycle as quickly. So that really put kind of my eyes open to Profoto Speedlights, because again, I had since then moved away from Speedlights and just focused on what I knew could give me the power, the recycle time, everything was kind of in the B10 world. This became a kind of eye-opener, especially the A10 when that came out. I was just like, wow, I did not expect the A10 to have that type of power and recycle time and things like that. So it was kind of cool.
One thing I did want to talk about briefly is modifiers, the availability of modifiers for both of these types of systems, because back in the day, literally there was almost nothing available for Speedlights. It was those, Gary Fong had one of those dome things, I think that we all had, and that was a way to diffuse the light a little bit and spread it out evenly, maybe around the corners and stuff. And that was about it. And I remember still, going and getting straws, black straws, and cutting them and gaff taping them together to make a grid. But now we have, grid sets available, through companies like Magmod and of course Native brand, for Profoto. They have their own grids as well. So things like that, smaller soft boxes, bigger soft boxes that are becoming available now. So it's becoming comparable in terms of, the modifiers available for Speedlights versus the modifiers available for monolights. And I think at the end of the day, I think monolights still have quite a lot more variety. I think, again, the limiting factor becomes size and what you can put on a little flash like that. Again, going back to that 5-foot octa example, it's never going to hold that weight, right? Versus something like that where it can. And of course, all these other, especially with Profoto, having, about 200 different modifiers for lights, most of those are catered towards the bigger monolights versus the Speedlights. But they've certainly come a long way, and we're able to create very comparable images because of the comparable modifiers that are currently available, which is awesome.
I really like this particular modifier because, again, it's portability. If I'm going to pack everything up, I personally don't like to be arming all the modifiers. I mean, I've seen videos where they show, oh, in 3 minutes you can put this thing together, and they show how they do it. I'm like, well, this guys must have done it like 50 times and they know exactly how to throw it together. But for me, it's just another thing that if it could be 2 seconds to put it together, I like the fact that this collapses. You just stick it in your car, wherever you have to go, and when you need it, you just pop it and it's ready to go. So modifiers, again, for Speedlights weren't this versatile in the past, and you would have to put it together. The ones that I was using, you would still have a certain amount of time to put it together, and then when you were ready to pack up, you'd have to take it apart again. So that's what made the benefit for
so,
this.
I mean, that is a lot more, when you really look at the setup time, it's this.
That's it.
Right, and then to tear down, it's this, and you put it in a bag, which is awesome. But this one still, if we were to take this one down, there is still some time involved in getting all these, all these things out and packing it together, make sure they don't fall out and whatnot.
Which is the reason I use Magmod.
Yeah, exactly. So again,
Magmod's like an umbrella, it just pops open and.
Without this being a Profoto commercial, it's just again,
Too late.
It's the gear that we use, so that's what we can talk about. But obviously, there's other brands that have now come a long way in making modifiers more accessible and fast to set up or tear down. Definitely.
Very nice. Did you want to showcase any of the other modifiers? I just like that. That to me is something that even if I was shooting, again, different lens, but I would even just kind of do that.
Yeah, you
I like just shooting this and having this off camera. I can kind of move it around. To me, that's a great thing.
Well, and that's what's great about, again, going back to which one would you pick, right? Again, that you have the ability to do that, to hold that light with one hand. It's super light. The modifiers are super light, so that has that going for it for sure. Versus, putting up a heavier monolight up and holding that around for a few hours for sure. So in terms of modifiers, I'll talk about the ones that are comparable. Again, a grid set that's available for a monolight like a B10 or B10X is now available in a grid format as well, right? So we're talking about these two modifiers. Again, different sizes, different diameters here. But again, we can create similar type of light now based on, whether you're using a monopod or a monolight and a Speedlight, right? Little domes as well to diffuse some of that light are available. And again, even now, Profoto released a click magnum as well, so you can now amplify that light another stop with your smaller A10. So it's getting, we're in a good place. I think where companies are starting to realize, we are using lighting. We are really into off-camera lighting, playing with light. So it's nice to have those options more readily available to us.
With Speedlights, do you normally use them as your main light or as a kicker? Because, for example, if this was a multi-light setup, maybe the B10 is your main light, and this, I would think, and I've done this in the past, where I've just used this as a hair light,
Sure.
or even hidden it. I know with you have some images where if it's a couple, you might have one of these just behind and shooting so that they look like they're in silhouette.
Yeah.
So that's something that, just because this can be easily hid behind a person, that you don't see it. So that's, again, these are all creative things that you can do, but using the Speedlight. That's the way when I would think about using these kinds of lights. In my head, it's always like, oh, it could be a kicker or hair light or something coming in from the side. I know you've also shown, like, if you wanted to have fake sunlight coming in a window or something like that, you would use this with a gel, change the color, and then have that come in as a fake sunset or something
100%,
like that.
and that's another modifier that's available to both now, right? Smaller diameter for Speedlights and bigger diameter for monolights, where you can change the color of those lights and play, which is pretty sweet, for sure.
Yeah. Does price come into play between them? Because I know that, for example, there are a lot of brands of Speedlights that are very inexpensive. They run into the issues of build quality, the batteries, you have to use the AA's and things like that, but they are less expensive. You can buy a couple of those for then the price of one of the studio strobes. For me, because of the versatility of the studio strobe, and that's my preference, I kind of don't look at that money aspect now as much as I did in the past. Right. Whereas in the past, I would have gone, and I did, go the Speedlight round and just keep buying Speedlights.
Yeah, I think when if you're starting out in off-camera lighting, it might be hard to justify buying one of those lights. But it's like that saying goes: you buy the fourth thing first, so you don't have to go through that experience, right? But I think if you're starting out, an inexpensive light might be a great way to get started. However, it does come with drawbacks, right? Some of the menus are extremely frustrating, and half the battles when I talk to other photography students, they just can't even get started because the confusion of what these symbols mean and how to actually get it working. So that's a big hurdle just to get started. But at least it's a way to perhaps get you to play with light. And again, that's how I started, with a very inexpensive light. And then you'll just run into those limitations, right? It won't be enough power. The recycling won't be where you want it to be. The batteries are gonna, be all over the place, or won't allow you to recycle fast. And those frustrations are then going to, get transferred into a decision, perhaps, to get something a little bit more, more reliable, more better quality, that kind of thing, right? And perhaps you end up with a monolight, right? If you are always working outside and always battling the sun, you're going to learn very quickly that a Speedlight has those limitations, and they're going to come at you pretty fast, right? If you're using a light once in a while, and you're usually in studio, you use a family shoot, maybe you just need a pop of light, perhaps that's all you need. So it really depends. It's like choosing the right tool for the job. If you're a mechanic trying to fix a car, you got to have the right, wrench and to get that job done, right? So that's what it boils down to, I think.
Yeah, and in conclusion, I mean, this is now the third webinar. We kind of based them all around lighting. We started off with natural light, we went to constant light, now we're talking Speedlight, studio strobes. But it is all different tools of light. There is no right and wrong. As a creator, I kind of look at it like, as you mentioned, is this the right tool for this specific job? I'm going to this location, this is what my ambient light will be. So all of those kind of factor into what am I going to bring to this shoot. Now, again, in our case, where you have a selection of tools and you can kind of look down and say, I'm going to take this and this and this, that's one. If you're starting out and you don't have the facility of having all the different choices, then you're kind of restricted, and then you have to do the workarounds and say, okay, this is what I have, how can I make it work?
Because at the end of the day, there isn't one tool to get everything done. Just like there isn't a 12 to 400 f1.2 lens out there. Something like that does not exist. I mean, I would love it, but it's
kidding
just
me
not,
how big that lens would be? I wouldn't carry that.
Yeah. But it doesn't exist, so you need multiple lenses, right? There's a reason why we have a bag of lenses. Yeah.
So
similarly with modifiers and lights, it's just, I always say a light is just like another lens, and you have to decide, and a modifier is just like, is it the 2.8 lens, or is it the 50 millimeter lens, or is it an 85? What is it you're trying to create? And those factors come into play in decision making for sure. So there isn't one light that does everything. There are limitations to everything, right? If it isn't power, well, maybe it's weight. If it's not weight, it's perhaps, something else.
And I think that in the end, again, it's a ranking. I usually then will say, well, what's my preference? My preference may be the B10. Like right now, at this time, that's my favorite light, and it's the one that I'll try to use the most. Yeah. But there are scenarios where I have brought the B10 on location, and it was a cloud-covered day, and the lighting was perfect already, and I didn't use off-camera flash because the lighting outside was perfect. It was great. It was giving me the results that I was looking for, so I didn't have to use that off-camera flash in that scenario. There are other times where I'm like, thank God I brought the light, because it really saves the day. Right. So again, understanding light, how it affects your subject, it really matters. And these are tools, and at the end of the day, a tool like this is incredible to utilize it to get the results that you want. And that's, I guess, the creative process. It's what I like. So anyway.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if we made your decision in choosing a Speedlight or a monolight any easier, but hopefully, we've given you some ideas on how they can be used, how we utilize them, and of course, the biggest thing, their differences and how they differ from each other and how we can use them. So, yeah, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate your time. Thank you to BenQ. Thank you to our videographer, Louise. Thank you for our model, Julia, as well. Thank you to Yadu, and
thank you to you as well.
I'll thank myself too.
That's right.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.